Morning, everybody. We'll be starting in a few seconds. Just want to ask everybody if they would to turn off their cell phones, please. And just for logistics, there are restrooms outside in the hall to the right. Morning again. Yes, the rain has let up a little, so we're thankful for that. Hope that you were able to stay dry last evening. My name is Jack McLennan. I'm with the U.S. Department of Labor, and I'm a member of the Forum's Planning Committee. And it's a great pleasure to introduce Toni Preckwinkle, President of the Cook County Board, who will be speaking about her experiences bringing about change in county government. I had the privilege of working with President Preckwinkle within the Chicago Department of Economic Development a number of years ago. Later, Toni headed the Chicago Jobs Council, a nonprofit association promoting employment and training, and then went on to become the alderman from Chicago's 4th Ward, which happens to be also the home of President Barack Obama. Earlier, President Preckwinkle taught high school history as a teacher in the Chicago Public Schools. Recently, President Preckwinkle was named the County Leader of the Year by the American City and County magazine. Her tenure with city government has been characterized by a commitment to reform, fiscal responsibility, independence, innovation, and accountability. One of the noteworthy things, I think, is if you look on her website, you will see that the county's budget and expenditures for the year have been made open to the public, which is really noteworthy in county government history. The forum feels that she is uniquely qualified to discuss effective government leadership with you, and so I present President Preckwinkle.
So good morning, everybody. Good morning. I apologize first and foremost for my tardiness. Thank you for your patience. I'm grateful that you invited me today, and before I begin, I'll say that I look forward to your questions. I'm going to keep my remarks relatively short, but I hope that you have lots of questions, because that's always my favorite part of these presentations. As you heard in introduction, we started out with a mantra of fiscal responsibility, innovative leadership, transparency and accountability, and improved services. And those are the 4 tenets that have guided us for the last 20 months. Sometimes it seems a lot longer. 20 months. When we walked in the door on December 6th of 2010, there was no budget, no preliminary budget, but we were already into our first quarter. The county has a very peculiar system. They allow you to get your budget passed by the end of the first quarter. Your obligation is to get it done by the end of the first quarter. Needless to say, after we got the first budget together, we decided that it was important to get the budget passed before the fiscal year actually began. Think of that. But when we walked in the door, we had no budget. We took 2 months to get our budget ready, and then a month to get it passed, and we made it by the end of February as required. We faced a $487 million shortfall walking in the door. Before I actually got sworn in, I met with the other 11 separately elected officials. And by the way, one of the difficulties in being the chief executive of Cook County is that we have a tremendous number of separately elected officials with their own fiefdoms. If you think about the city of Chicago, we have our alderman, we have the mayor, and then there are 2 other citywide elected officials, the treasurer and the clerk. But in Cook County, there are 11 other elected officials other than the chief executive and the members of the legislative body. I met with the 11 separately elected officials before I was sworn in. I told them we were going to have to identify 16% cuts. And their initial response was not enthusiastic. Actually, One of them said, somebody I actually like and get along with, why don't you just take all the money out of the healthcare system? And I said, no, we're not going to do that. This is going to be shared sacrifice. Nobody is absolved and nobody is alone. We ended up coming close to that 16%, about 15% reduction in operations, supported by general funds and then select special funds. So we made the cuts that we had to make in that first year. We immediately started with the second year. That year, the budget was, the gap was $315 million. But as I said at the time, it was even harder because we'd already done the obvious things. We'd picked the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So, you know, every year you do this, it gets harder and harder because you've done what's obvious. This year, the gap is $267.5 million. But again, and so we've closed gaps in the last 2 years of about $800 million, but we've got another $267 million to go. And it gets harder every year. And frankly, what we're pushed toward is structural changes, and mostly that means reducing our workforce, frankly. Which is, I never thought when I campaigned for 2 years for this job that one of the first things I'd have to do is lay off a lot of county workers. Most of whom are just good and decent people doing their jobs every day. And because the county could not afford the workforce that it had, we had to make some changes, and those have been difficult for me, the hardest part of my job. One of the things we decided from the very beginning is that we were going to have a more disciplined budget process. So this is not a joke. We walked in the door, so we're making these 16% cuts, and we make cuts in the president's own office. And the numbers don't add up. And then we realized that although there was a budgeted number for what was being spent in the president's office, it had no relation to what was actually being spent. And and we decided that if there was no discipline in the president's office, there surely was no discipline anyplace else, and that proved to be the case. So we cut much deeper than we anticipated because the president's office expenditures had no relation to the budget numbers. What became obvious to us after that first budget process is that we needed to get a better handle on operations. And so we instituted what we call STAR, Set Targets, Achieve Results, which is performance management. What I often say is, you know, we walked in the door, nobody could tell you how much it cost to fill potholes, nobody could tell you how much it cost to get the tax bills out, nobody was paying any attention about how much it cost to actually deliver the services that we were providing. So we began this Set Targets, Achieve Results, and we divided the county up into 5 substantive areas. So property and taxation, finance and administration, economic development, healthcare, and public safety. Now, what that required was people who had previously operated in silos to work together. So the property and taxation, this was one of my favorite examples. People got together and they said, okay, what is it that what's our goal? What are we going to try to do together? And what they decided was they were going to get the second of our property tax bills out on time for the first time in 34 years. Now, the county collects property taxes for all the taxing bodies within the county. So that means every school district, every city and town and village, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, the mosquito abatement districts, everybody. And for those districts that were in good financial shape, if they didn't get the tax money on time, what they were foregoing was the interest on the money, basically, whatever they could have invested it in and gotten some return. For those entities that were on the edge, they, of course, had to borrow money to meet their payroll and expenses until such time as the property tax money came in. So though everybody was being penalized, either you're being penalized because you had to pay interest on loans or you're being penalized because of foregone investment income. So the property and taxation people, which is the assessor, the board of review, the treasurer, and the clerk, figured out, you know, working backwards, figured out what the milestones were that they'd have to meet to get the bills out on time and did it. So this summer, for the first time in 34 years, the second of our property tax bills came out on time. But it's a result of our forcing people to work together and to think about together what their goals were and how they were going to meet them collectively. We got a lot of help in doing this. I can't say enough good about the Civic Consulting Alliance. When I was at the city, Civic Consulting Alliance, which is an organization that provides pro bono assistance to government at all levels. They'd worked with the city and the CTA and the Chicago Public Schools and the state. They'd never worked with the county. And I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. Anyway, we got them to help us, along with the Boston Consulting Group, to put together our performance management system. And I'm deeply indebted both to BCG and to the Civic Consulting Alliance for their good work. So I'll tell my story about the Civic Consulting Alliance. I knew about their work, as I said, from my tenure as an alderman. So after I won the Democratic primary in February of 2010, I went to see them. This is an 80% Democratic county, and I figured my chances of being elected were pretty good. So I said, you know, I could really use your help. I went to Todd Stroger and asked him basically to work with us in transition, and he told me that he would do that provided I promised to keep an indeterminate number of his folks. And since I was unwilling to make that commitment, he was not willing to work with us on transition. So I needed some help, some external help. So I went through what our needs were, and I was politely told that I actually had to win an election before I got help from the Civic Consulting Alliance. So on November 3rd, the day after the November 2nd election in 2010, I went to the Civic Consulting Alliance and said, okay, I won the election. I really need your help now. And they have been wonderful. They either have provided or mobilized for us more than $5 million in consulting support. And we couldn't have done the good work that we've accomplished without their help. So I'm very grateful to them. With the help of our pro bono partners, we provided training, resources, and additional support to county agencies to drastically improve their performance management. And we're holding all agencies, including the President's office, accountable by requiring the preparation of a quarterly report to establish measurable goals and detail efforts to meet those goals. And let me tell you, there was a little bit of resistance to that in the beginning. I'm underestimating this a little bit. A lot of resistance because people are afraid that if you publish the results of your work, you'll get whacked. Of course, if you don't hold yourself accountable by publishing your successes and failures, you not only hide things from the public, you don't hold yourself properly accountable. But we got people to agree to it by making it clear that we weren't going to hammer people. We were just going to report our progress as we went along and highlight the ways in which we were successful in achieving our goals and put together the strategies that we needed to meet the challenges that we faced. And our goal, of course, was to try to reward success rather than failure, and instead of funding the status quo, try to fund efforts that improved performance. And this is a strategy that most businesses and successful organizations pursued already, of course. It was just unfortunately new to the county. With this foundation, we were able to approach the budget process in a much better frame of mind the second time around and surely this third time around. Another example is that we got all of the county's public safety agencies, the sheriff, the state's attorney, the chief judge, the public defender, the clerk of the court, those 5 entities, to work together to share the same data, using it to set cross-department goals and working together to achieve them. What the public safety folks, those 5 entities, agreed was that we were detaining too many nonviolent offenders. So we put together a plan to try to increase our alternatives to detention, such as electronic monitoring, try to put more emphasis on, for low-level offenders, releasing them or on their own recognizance. And at the same time, we started investing in community-based alternatives to detention for our youth detained at the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, the JTDC. And let me just say we've had tremendous luck there. The Juvenile Temporary Detention, the juvenile justice system in Cook County is in lots of ways a model. Because we started out in 2000 with on a daily basis of between 800 and 1,000 kids in the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. Have any of you ever been there? Okay, it's a youth prison. So I'm a teacher by profession. It's a profoundly disturbing place. We started out in 2000 with between 800 and 1,000 kids there on a daily basis. We're now down to about 260. And, I would recommend to you any of our juvenile courts, just stopping in someday and look at what's going on. Each judge has a case manager, and the case manager is aware of services that can be provided to the young people that come before the court, and the judges have a geographic area that they're responsible for. So the young people who come into the court come there on the basis of where they live, not where their offense is committed. So there's a consistency for at least multiple offenders in the court that they come into, so the same judge sees them. And also there's an opportunity for the court personnel to get to know the service providers and specialists of various kinds within that particular geographic area that they can refer the kids to or that they can employ to help meet the needs of the young people that come before the court. So we've seen not only a dramatic reduction in the number of kids, young people, in our youth prison, but also, I think, a very effective way of dealing with the kids who come into our criminal justice system. Now, let me just say, our juvenile temporary detention center, like our jail, is at what I usually say the intersection of racism and poverty. If the population of Cook County is about a third African American, a third Latino, about a third white and Asian. But if you go to the juvenile temporary detention center or the jail, you'd think that the only people who live in the county are black and brown, because it's mostly black and brown and overwhelmingly black at that youth that end up in the juvenile temporary detention center, and it's overwhelmingly African Americans and Latinos who end up in our jail. All right, so let's talk about adult offenders. Last week, we announced the findings of our 6-month review of bond court by our Justice Advisory Council. And let me just say, we couldn't have done this without Justice Ann Burke. Justice Burke agreed to be the head of our Justice Advisory Council. One of the first things they decided to look at was bond court, because it's the entry point into the criminal justice system. They started their work in January. They just completed it, and we had a press conference last week. They looked at current practices and procedures and how we could make improvements. And they made a number of suggestions, some of which are already being implemented. I think the most interesting of which is that they said that what we need, and we're going to put it together, is a motion to reconsider court. People come into bond court. The judge gives them a pretty modest bail. So if the judge gives you a bail of say, $6,000, that's the breakpoint we usually use, what you have to come up with is $600 in cash. But a number of people spend a considerable amount of time in jail because they can't come up with $600 or less. Last time I was in bond court, one of the most troubling things I saw was 2 young men who were arrested on a minor drug charge. The judge gave them $2,000 bond, which is $200. Neither of them had any family members in the court, and you just had the sense that they were going to spend a considerable period of time in jail for the lack of $200 in cash. Now, any of us in this room could go put $200 in cash on our credit card and be out in a heartbeat, right? But there are a lot of people who spend a lot of time in jail because they can't come up with the cash bond. And clearly, if the judge sets a very modest cash bond like that, they don't really think that you're a danger to yourself or the community. But if you can't come up with it, you sit in jail. And sitting in jail is very expensive. Not only do you perhaps lose your job, or you're taken away from your schoolwork or whatever, and surely away from your family, it costs us all taxpayers $143 a day to keep somebody in jail. So at some point, it makes more sense for us to release these folks on their own recognizance for modest bond than to keep them in jail at $143 a day, where they're getting no help, no drug treatment, no help for their mental illness, nothing. And I don't know if you know an organization called Thresholds. They came to see me early on. Thresholds serves the mentally ill, people who struggle with mental illness, and they said that on any given day, a third to 40%, so 33 to 40% of the people in our jail are people who are struggling with mental illness. What we did starting in the 1980s, as you're well aware, is decide that what we needed to do is deinstitutionalize the mentally ill and have community facilities to support them. And so we got rid of our mental health hospitals. but we didn't create the community institutions or support the community institutions that would provide care in our neighborhoods. So now we're in the position where our jails are our largest mental health institutions in the country. All right, let's talk about property and taxation. As I said, we got our bills out on time, which I think is a major accomplishment. And we did this not only by getting people to work together, but by providing them the support that they needed, particularly ramping up the information technology staff to provide them with assistance and investing in information technology for them. Let me talk about some of the things we've done to invest in our county. When I walked in the door, there was no Bureau of Economic Development, so we decided we wanted to create one. Most of the county business is public safety and public health. 35% of our budget is public health, 39% is public safety, so 3/4 of our money goes to public health and public safety. But we think it's important for the county to have a role in economic development and to support the economic vitality of the county. So we created a Bureau of Economic Development and put together our planning, capital planning, and capital development, community planning, building and zoning, and workforce initiatives in one department so that we would have an opportunity to do more focused and intense planning. And as a result, I think we've been able to get a handle on some of the development issues around the county, and hopefully later today we're going to be announcing our Council of Economic Advisors, who will provide us with direction in terms of what we ought to be doing internally and what we ought to be doing with the business and community and civic and academic institutions to support economic development in our region. So I think we're on the right track on economic development, although we have a long way to go. Let me talk a little bit about transparency. We walked in the door, we released our transition report, we put it online. We released also a 100-day report, an annual report on how we're doing. We have these quarterly reports on performance management. We've tried every way we can to make information available to the public. And we think that's important not only for internally, but also, needless to say, externally, so that we keep our citizens informed about what we're trying to undertake. Let me talk about accountability. From the very beginning, we made our standards and goals very clear, and we tried to let people know that we were serious about holding them accountable, partly through our a STAR initiative, but partly through our ethics initiatives as well. Unfortunately, our most recent ethical challenge has been in the news lately, and that is whether the county's ethics ordinance applies to the separately elected officials or just to people under the president's office. Now, of our between 22 and 23,000 employees, only 2,000 of them are in the president's office. And it's our view that the ethics ordinance ought to apply to every separately elected official and their staff, as well as just the folks in the president's office. We'll see how that plays out over the next several months. We have an interactive budget website to give county residents a chance to see how their tax dollars are being used and to give us suggestions. And actually, my staff, being too cute for me, have this sort of Tell Toni feature on our website where people can give their feedback on how they think our administration is doing and give feedback on what advice they have for us in terms of pursuing our budget initiatives. Earlier this year, the League of Women Voters, one of my favorite organizations, contacted my office and the clerk's office with recommendations about how to improve resident access to information about our county board meetings. And the League of Women Voters helped us identify ways in which the county government could be more transparent and accountable. And we worked with them, and actually, as a result of our mutual efforts, we've changed the way in which we present to people the county board meetings and our websites, including live streaming of all of our board meetings and archiving our board meeting proceedings. I think this has made our meetings more accessible to people, and again, promoted this culture of transparency and accountability. One of the ways in which we've changed the way in which county government operates is to work more closely with the city. So right after Rahm Emanuel was elected mayor, but before he took office, he and I sat down and we talked about the fact that we shared a building, but we had very little to do with each other. So after he actually was sworn in, we set up a task force, 7 or 8 people, again staffed by the Civic Consulting Alliance, and we said, you know, we need you to think about how it makes sense for us to work together. And they came up with about 24 ideas. There were some of them are obvious. Joint purchasing, for example, the county's budget is $3 billion, the city's is $6 billion, so $9 billion of leverage in the marketplace is more than either of us individually. Some things were obvious as well. So if you're a city investigator for the Department of Revenue and you go into a retail establishment and they don't have stamps for cigarettes on their cigarettes, so they haven't paid the tax, the county tax on cigarettes, the county revenue people were citing them only for the county violations, and the city people were citing them only for the city violations. So we got our revenue teams to enforce the law for both the city and the county. Obvious, but had not been done before. We looked at our workforce initiatives and discovered that there were 3 workforce entities in Cook County, one for the city, one for the western, southwestern, and south suburbs, and a separate one for the north and northwest suburbs. Now, of course, people who live in the county work all over the county, but if you were in the city of Chicago, you would not be told about jobs available in Evanston or Oak Park or Schaumburg or Palatine. And likewise, if you lived in those places, you wouldn't be told about jobs in Chicago, which didn't make any sense. So we have combined our workforce initiatives, and we now have a not-for-profit organization called the Chicago Cook County Workforce Partnership, which will probably be called the Partnership, that began the beginning of July. And it's a not-for-profit entity so that it can get philanthropic and corporate support. Whereas before our 3 entities were only eligible for government dollars. So we think we'll not only have a more comprehensive and effective workforce initiative, but we'll also be able to tap into philanthropic and corporate support in a way that we weren't before. We've tried to focus on regional economic development. Earlier this week, I was in Milwaukee for a conference. The folks at Milwaukee, it was the Marquette Law School and the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. We're looking at, Milwaukee as part of the Chicago megalopolis. And what I pointed out is that, contrast to what Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin, seems to think, we're all in the Midwest together here. And the idea that you can somehow grow your economy by stealing jobs from just across the state line. If you'll recall, Scott Walker was here at one point talking about how, Illinois firms ought to relocate to the better business climate in Wisconsin. If you're just stealing jobs from your neighbors, you're not growing your economy. You have to figure out how to make the pie bigger rather than just slice it up differently. So we have focused on trying to promote regional efforts, not only here in Illinois in our 6-county region, but also thinking about how we can work with the folks in southeastern Wisconsin and northwest Indiana. I campaigned on a promise to reduce the sales tax. What I said at the time and what I still believe is that having the highest sales taxes in the country wasn't good for us, and it wasn't good for working families. It wasn't good for our businesses. So we've proceeded with our efforts to roll back the 1% sales tax increase that was enacted under my predecessor, Todd Stroger. The last 0.25% will be gone by the end of this year. I think not only is it good to keep your campaign promises, but I think that this showed our commitment to the economic vitality of our region. The problem, of course, is that it made it harder for us to balance our budget, and it impacts our ability to close our budget deficit, but we think that it's discipline that we need to impose, and we're going to accept the challenge that's been caused by the fact that we voluntarily have reduced our own revenues. We're going to try to make our region the hub of the Midwest. Now, that's already true pretty much. If you think about this region, again, southeastern Wisconsin, our Cook in the collar counties, and northwest Indiana, it's about 11 million people. 11 million people. 5.3 million of them live in Cook County. So Cook County is kind of the center of not only the Chicagoland region, but of the Midwest. And we have to figure out how we can strengthen this region and how we can support the existing businesses. And the way, frankly, to do that is to support the businesses that you have and create a climate where entrepreneurs can thrive rather than trying to figure out how you're going to steal jobs from your neighbors. So that's what we're working on. One of the things that we did to support businesses is something we called Commit to Cook. We're trying to encourage residents in Cook County to shop in Cook County, do business in Cook County, and we've focused on economic development programs and tools that attract businesses and consumers to Cook County while centralizing the resources at the county's disposal to create jobs and provides incentives for businesses. So, for example, we went to things like the auto show to encourage people to buy their cars in Cook County. Now, what that means, of course, is they pay their taxes to the city and the county if they buy their cars in Cook County, but it also helps our businesses in Cook County. And we're trying to figure out how, through these various trade shows and other activities, we can encourage our consumers to make expenditures here in Cook County. So, over the last 20 months, we've passed 2 budgets. We're in the midst of getting our third prepared. We've closed an $800 million gap over those first 2 years, and again, we've got $267.5 this year to deal with. We fortunately have wonderful leadership in our healthcare system. I said 35% of our budget goes to healthcare. And the independent governing board chose Dr. Ram Raju, who was second in command in New York, to head up our healthcare system. And he's been a godsend. He's a very talented and committed person. And I have great confidence that if anybody can keep our health system afloat, he can. And let me just say, my alma mater runs a teaching hospital, the University of Chicago. And they provide less than 5% charity care. Same is true for Northwestern and most of the other not-for-profits that aren't safety net hospitals. They provide a very modest amount of charity care. The County of Cook provides $500 million in charity care every year. $500 million. We're going to have to figure out how to get places like the University of Chicago and Northwestern and Rush to do more of their fair share in caring for those who are uninsured or underinsured. And we're going to work on that along with Dr. Raju. So we have 2 challenges there. One is internal, to get our health care system in better order, and the other is to try to get the support that we need from the broader health care community. That's quite a challenge, but I have confidence in Dr. Raju. Usually when people think of public service, they think of their municipality, in our case the city of Chicago, or maybe state or federal government. They don't often think of the county. And I'm very grateful that there have been a lot of good people who've come to work for the county. First and foremost, Kurt Summers, my chief of staff, but also our budget director, Andrea Gibson, our chief financial officer, Tarek Malhans, Maureen O'Donnell, who's in HR, and a bunch of talented young people. Actually, most of the people in my personal office are young enough to be my children, although they don't like me to say that. Neil Carey and Andrew Schwarm in particular. A lot of good people from the Civic Consulting Alliance, Lydia Murray, Andrew Gale Sherman, Shurti, I can never say Shurti's last name, Jayaraman, Shurti, anyway. So I'm very grateful for the good people who have come to work for us and what we've been able to do over the last 20 months. Grateful to you for inviting me, and I welcome your questions and thank you for your attention. Yes, in the back, sir.
I'll ask a couple. One, you mentioned all the elected officials in the county, and is there any any real effort to eliminate the governmental units? I mean, you've got the assessor, you've got the treasurer, there seems to be a lot of overlap. And actually, my more pointed question for you was, you're regarded as a reform president. You're extremely highly regarded as an alderman and in his job. And once you won the primary, despite the fact that that group wouldn't help you, you were the president of Cook County government. We all knew that. And I guess my question to you is, why did you endorse people in the primary in the general election who clearly don't share your values? And I'm referring to Mr. Berrios.
Okay, let's start with that one first. So Joe Berrios is a friend of mine. He's the chairman of the Democratic Party, and in contrast to his predecessors, and I've been a Democratic committeeman since 1992. In contrast to his predecessors, he gave opportunities for leadership in the party to African Americans, Latinos, and women. Before that, it was a white boys club. And they decided who we were going to endorse, who we were going to support. They chaired all the committees. I didn't like that much. And I didn't think it was very good for the county or the party. So I was very grateful to Joe for opening up the party to women and to people of color. He's Latino. And I like him personally. I think he's done a good job as assessor. You know, the only reason we got the tax bills out on time is because the assessor did his job on time. Because the work all starts with the assessor. Once the assessments are done, they can go to the Board of Review, and then the treasurer and the clerk get them out. Okay? But if the assessor doesn't get the job done on time, the Board of Review can't do their work timely, nor can the treasurer or the clerk. And Joe had been on the Board of Review. He knew what needed to be done, and he got the job done, for which I'm grateful. No, let me finish. Thank you. Now, the rest of what I say is what I've said to him personally and what I've said repeatedly in public, which is, you know, I don't believe in hiring your family members. I've never hired anybody in my family. You know, I think it gives people the impression that government is, you know, for friends and family only, and it leads to the perception that government is corrupt and self-centered, and I think that's wrong. And as I said, I've said that to him personally, and I've said that repeatedly when people ask this question. And the other thing is, you know, you have to look at things in their entirety. Joe Berrios was running against Forrest Claypool. I had to work with Forrest when he was commissioner of the parks, the park superintendent, not a commissioner, park superintendent. And what I said at the time is I would never hire him, and that's true. I had to work with him. I mean, I'm not going to go into why I would never hire him. I'll just tell you, I would never hire him. So he was running against somebody who I'd worked with, who I thought had unenlightened attitudes on race, and who I would never hire. So I chose to support Joe Berrios, and I don't apologize for it. Now, what was the second part of your question?
Well, by combining county government offices,
we tried. There was a motion to combine the recorder and the clerk, which seemed to make a lot of sense, and we couldn't get 9 votes for it. Combining those offices would have resulted in a substantial decrease in the number of jobs. And there were committeemen who I won't name who had a lot of jobs in the recorder's office, not so much the clerk, but in the recorder's office, and didn't want us to proceed with that consolidation. And we got 8 votes and not 9, and you need 9 votes to pass something. Yes?
I'm Mary Kunda from the Social Security Administration. You've talked about the importance of cross-government entities cooperating with one another for efficiencies and for leveraging our power. How would you foresee the federal government taking a role in that sort of cross-government partnership?
Well, at the moment, the way in which we're working closely with the federal government is responding to their subpoenas. You may have read that a former commissioner, Joseph Moreno, and a former alderman, Ambrosio Medrano, have been indicted. And so we're being inundated by subpoenas about things that they may have been involved in, that Commissioner Moreno may have been involved in while he was serving. I mean, I'm making a joke about it, but it's not funny. You walked in the door, we had 2 federal investigations underway, one for our employment training initiative called the President's Office of Employment and Training, and the other in Homeland Security. There were indictments this past week of people who had formerly worked in POET, the President's Office of Employment and Training, and I expect that more people will be pursued as a result of the government's investigations in Homeland Security. I don't want to have an adversarial relationship with the federal government, and we've cooperated with all of these investigations and subpoenas. We do work closely with the federal government around Homeland Security, for example. Although notably we've been unwilling to cooperate, if any of you are here from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, we have been notably unwilling to cooperate with them. We decided early on that one of the requests they made of us, which is that we hold people beyond the point at which a judge said that they could go free, was unfair and unjust, and furthermore cost us a lot of money. So we declined to hold people on federal detainers for 48 hours after a judge had determined that they could go free. And so we're in an ongoing discussion with the folks at ICE about this. But, you know, I guess I would say that I'm going to focus on trying to work with the city and trying to work with our collar counties and trying to work regionally with the folks in Wisconsin and Indiana. And we're going to work with the federal government in the ways that we're compelled to in responding to these subpoenas, and in other ways, as I talked about, you know, the work we're doing with Homeland Security. But my priority, frankly, is on that regional cooperation, collaboration, more than the federal, just honestly.
We'd like to take a 5-minute break. Please enjoy the coffee and the refreshments back. Give the president a chance to catch her breath and also take a break as well. And we would like to continue the question and answer session after that. If you would please take a 5-minute break and get some coffee and refreshments in the back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sound